All right, you guys. So this is part of Alex Murdaugh trial. I did it again.
Mm-hmm.
His name knows no bounds. It could be anything.
Well, it's whatever you want it to be, I think.
I think so too. Yeah.
Yeah.
Alex.
Well, in that moment, you wanted it to be Alex.
I did.
Murdaugh.
I really did. Yeah.
And that's fine. That's fine.
It's just whatever.
We're not mad about mispronouncing his name because he's a total piece of trash. So.
Exactly. And also, can I just say, when we covered this.
Oh, God. I know what you're going to say.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm bonking. When we covered this on our main feed, and we did it in 2 parts, Tori said in the beginning, and I thought it was hilarious, and it was spot on anyway, but because, the Murdaugh family is above the law in their area, right? Like, they don't follow rules. Nothing applies to them. They can get whatever they want. And she was like, what, are they above the English language too? And yeah, because it was like, it's spelled Alex Murdaugh, laugh, Laughh, Daughh, like you would think it was spelled that way. And we were like, yeah, but I guess it's pronounced like Elick or Illick or whatever. This is absolutely no disrespect to the entire low country of South Carolina. But we had a couple people write in that were very mad about that. And it has nothing to do with people in general. It has everything to do with this son of a right here. Because he's a jerk. And so I don't care if he gets offended about his name. Like, it's not, no disrespect to like generations or how, like, I love a low country accent. It's really cool. I can't do it. It's very close to, I feel like, Creole and Cajun.
Mm-hmm.
They're close.
Yeah.
But yeah, somebody got real mad about that.
My bad. I meant this son of a bitch in general.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's that.
Sorry.
Yeah. If you watched part 1 of this, then this is an off the cuff episode. We're not even editing it. Whatever happens, happens. Jesus take the wheel. It's just, we decided we wanted to recap the trial. And so here we are. And if you don't know all of the basics of the case, this is not going to make sense to you. And if you didn't watch part 1, you probably want that too, because that's the prosecution's case.
Well, and I do think that this is an important time to note that, like, we're not your real mom. We never will be.
Sure.
But might be a good idea just to go ahead and refresh the memory.
Yeah, because there's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot to this case.
Yeah, and we're not trying to tell y'all what to do, but it's like, just think about it.
Yeah.
I do want to... I know. I brought her in.
Sure did. Is the lid missing or?
It's gone to ever. Yeah.
I thought so. I didn't remember having the lid the last 20 years I've used it.
No. But Taz is here. And Tweety's right here.
Oh.
That was your backpack. Remember that?
Oh, do I remember that backpack? Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought it was precious when I went through my Tweety phase because I was like in 6th grade.
I have a Taz backpack, similar, because Torella was Tweety, I was Taz, hence the cup. I have to be careful because there are slots here where it should have been locked in, but I just have to go around them. So anyway,
sure.
Cheers with my water.
Cheers. Yeah. Okay. So last episode, we finished off with like the prosecution rested their case. And again, I will say I'm not going through every single person that testified. They had hundreds. So we're just kind of hitting the high points here.
Well, and this was, again, to recap, a 6-week trial. So,
yeah. So it was the best 6 weeks of my life, but just kidding.
You're wrong.
Okay. So the defense case, All right. I'm going to tell you guys something. Oh, what?
So sorry. I just wanted to recap as well. I didn't follow this. So I am learning this at the same time if you have not followed it as you guys. So I'm reacting in real time.
Yeah, she's learning with you if you didn't follow it, like you said. Yeah.
The more you know.
All right. So I'm going to tell you guys something that was fairly disturbing to me. The coroner in this case, Richard Harvey, he talks about what the defense wants to do. One of the things that they've really, really, really got a hammer on is the timeline that the state is using, because now that we know that Alec was down at the kennels mere minutes before his family was murdered, it don't look good. But now they need to create more space in between when Alec was there and when the murder occurred. Because right now we're basing the murder off of a couple of things, but one of them being that their phones both locked at those 8:49, 8:50 minutes. And there's nothing to dispute that they died at that time, right? So they talk to the coroner, Richard Harvey, and they ask him, how did you determine the time of death? And he says, well, I did what a lot of people do and what I've done many times before, and lifted up the armpit there and stuck my hand right under, and if it feels warm or if it feels cold, we know they've been there a long time or not. Tori, I wish I was joking.
Is that...
That's what he said.
Is that proper protocol? Is that what we're doing here?
Not even a little bit.
What in the Michael West?
Exactly. Right under the armpit.
Bullshit are we talking about right now? And I will say, so sorry, betwixt is the proper.
Oh, yeah. Please be correct.
Yeah. What in the fucking Dr. Michael West shit is that?
So I felt very concerned by that. And I thought, well, what the fuck? Because, and of course the defense is going to hammer into this. Like, this is great for them because they're like, well, then you don't really know when they died. And determining time of death is difficult. There are scientific, there's a window. There are scientific things that you can do to determine the time of death. Stomach contents and how digested they are can be something.
Rigor.
Yep. But internal body temperature is one thing. But that's internal. Yeah. That's not armpit.
Not a Mary Catherine Gallagher.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I looked it up because I always thought that the coroner was a medical professional.
Oh, you texted me about this. And
this is where I figured that out. Yeah. So a coroner is not necessarily a medical professional. They are an elected person. This guy has been the coroner there for like 25 years or something. You don't have to be a doctor. You don't have to be a pathologist. You don't have to be. Now, many times a medical examiner is then going to do an autopsy, but there are places where the coroner can do it. In rural areas sometimes.
Shut your mouth up. Are you serious?
Because they don't have enough money to pay for both. Or, sometimes they'll send somebody to a bigger city to do it or whatever. But the coroner system, y'all, I didn't know we voted on coroners. I just did not. And they can literally be like pretty much, I think in Arkansas, the only specific criteria that you have to meet to be a coroner is over the age of 18 and no prior felonies. And what do coroners do? Exactly. And what do coroners do? They sign death certificates. They are the ones who the coroner is going to say, is this a homicide? A suicide? Undetermined? That's the coroner to do that.
Of death. Yes.
Yeah. Sometimes the coroner is also the sheriff. How is that not a conflict of interest? He's not in this case, but but he's real good friends with all them.
Good old boy mentality,
Exactly.
right?
So just to terrify you, that's something. So we really don't get much out of his testimony other than he don't know what the fuck he's doing. Buster did testify. And some of the takeaways that I had from his testimony were that he said that he and his dad, following the murders, were not worried about some murderer coming out of the woods and killing them. And we know from the state's case that Maggie's sister was worried about that for them. Because again, if this does have to do with the boat case and they killed Maggie too, then are they targeting the whole family? But Buster
and Alec got shot prior. So you would think that they're trying to annihilate the entire family. Right?
Yeah. And, Buster says in his testimony that no, they didn't. His dad definitely didn't seem worried about it. He didn't really feel all that worried about it. He said, either I was staying at hotels or I was at my girlfriend's house and they have their own like security cameras or whatever. And he's like, I didn't think I needed like a security detail following me or anything like that. I felt fine. He did testify about the layout of Alameda. And that was a point for the state because it made Alec carrying that blue rain jacket out to the smokehouse area, not once, but twice that week, or that he went to that area where it was later found. Just really strange because it's not on the way to anything. There's really not a reason for you to be there. I did feel for Buster. I feel bad for him. His brother and his mom have been murdered. His dad is a raging piece of shit. And I read an article at some point that said that because Buster went to court every day. And he was right there. He sat behind his dad, like a couple rows back, but he sat behind his dad. But I read an article at some point that said, and I can't remember exactly, but it was like, just because I am coming to court every day does not mean that I'm there supporting my father. It was something like that. So I don't know exactly how he feels. He hasn't really been super specific, but I know that this has got to be very difficult for him. And it just doesn't really seem like, I think he feels kind of trapped because his family is so prominent and the Murdaughs value loyalty above all and the Murdaugh name and,
Well, and I got to think too, like the grieving process and the accepting process has got to be very like multi-layered and extenuous. Like, I don't think that he could, it's so soon after everything happened, especially the trial, like it could take years for him to figure out where he falls on what he thinks. So.
And it's absolutely none of my business if he thinks his dad murdered his family or not, but I just wonder myself if he thinks he's guilty or not.
Well, I'm a very nosy person, so I want to know.
Me too.
I would watch that reality TV show, you know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah, for sure. So that was kind of the high points there. One of the things Jim Griffin asked him was, when your family had disagreements, how did they handle them? And he's like, I don't know, I guess civilly, like depends on our age and what they were. When we were little, we got spanked. When we were older, we talked about it, like just trying to point out that what is your dad going to pull out a gun and shoot you if he's mad at you or whatever? And it's like,
that's not fair.
Yeah, I see what you're trying to do there, I think, but I don't feel like it's working. I
feel bad. Honestly, I'm so sorry. I feel bad for the defense, though, because they didn't have a lot to work with here.
And especially considering that Alec had lied about his alibi, and they didn't know that it was a lie until that video came out. That's the only reason they know is because definitive proof came out that he was, in fact, at the kennels. So, they probably sat down at a table and were like, we are fucked.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I
We
don't know.
gotta regroup and get a game plan, and
Yeah, like now so now we just have to act like that video doesn't matter. Yeah, he was there, but it doesn't mean he killed him, which is technically true. Just because he was at the kennels minutes before they were killed doesn't mean he killed him, but he also says he didn't hear all those rifle shots. It's
well, and like you said in last episode, like if you lie about one thing, everything else has to be thrown out as true because you're not credible at this point. Like,
yeah. Exactly. One thing that we did not have until a couple weeks before the trial was the GMC OnStar data from the vehicles. And that's where we get that information about how fast he was driving to Alameda that night, hitting over 80 miles an hour. Now, the defense did get the man who came on and presented that information to concede that, well, can you tell if he was passing a car during that time? And he's like, well, no, I don't know what he was doing. I just know how fast he was driving. He's like, so you don't know okay. So he could have been passing a car. He's like, I mean, I guess, but I mean, whatever. And it confirms everything that confirms that he was at Alameda 20 minutes, just like Shelley, the caretaker, had said. His phone is connected to this, and so we know what phone calls he made through the vehicle and this, because he deleted a lot of the stuff from his phone. But it does appear on the OnStar. So this it confirms a lot of the timeline information, which is not good for him. But then Alex Murdaugh testifies. And a lot of people didn't think he was going to. I thought he would, because I think that he thinks he can talk his way out of anything. And his demeanor on the stand solidified that. You could tell that as he was talking, he thought he was
above the law,
swatting it away. Just, yeah.
Well, and you mentioned last episode that if you had heard his interviews and interrogations, whatever you want to call them, with police, you would have believed him. I mean, it's like he's a believable guy.
Mm-hmm. He is. He's really good at that. He can be very endearing and charismatic. He makes you. And his brother John Marvin testified as well. And John Marvin is very that way. John Marvin is a real likable guy. He seems like just sweet guy.
Wasn't he the one that was in I think it was a 2020 episode, and it was like 2 episodes that we watched? Yes. Wasn't he?
Mm-hmm. I think. Yeah, he's definitely been in some of them. He's a real, not necessarily quiet, just a real friendly, wouldn't meet a stranger kind of guy, I think. And so he told a couple stories about, like, at one point he was talking about that they'd gone to a ball game, and he's like, oh yeah, I did this and that, and bought a $15 beer, and kind of chuckling, and like he's kind of getting in there. I think they brought him in to sort of humanize the Murdaugh family. And he didn't really have a lot of information. He did, though, try to say that the day that they found out that his dad was going to be put in the hospital, so the day that these murders occurred, that the state is trying to paint this as this was dire, right? Because now Alec knows that his dad isn't going to be around. He doesn't have him to bail him out of shit anymore. He's about to die. And he says the prognosis was good that day. It wasn't a dire situation like the state is trying to make it sound, specifically because his dad had lung cancer. So when he took his dad to the hospital, the doctor said, or when he took him to the doctor and then they admitted him to the hospital, the doctor said there's 2 possible things here that are causing his trouble breathing. Either he has some kind of obstruction due to the cancer. That's worst case scenario, not good at all. Or he's got pneumonia. Pneumonia is not great, but it's treatable, and that would be best case scenario in this situation. And when they admitted him to the hospital, I think that they thought that it was the pneumonia route, so it seemed a little better than they had originally thought. But I mean, his dad did die 3 days later, so I still think that it was concerning for the family. but they are trying to act like, oh, he went in and out of the hospital all the time. This was nothing different. Nobody gave it a second thought kind of thing is what they're trying to say.
Sure.
But Alec testifies. So Jim Griffin questions him for the defense. This is where he talks about Maggie loving that Find Your Friends iPhone app or whatever. And I watched it again today, and it was just so funny because he's like, and she loved to surprise people, and so she knew you were at Walmart because of the app, and she'd text you and say, hey, pick me up a TV while you're at Walmart. And I'm just like, that's not where I thought that story was going. Like,
no,
what?
Not even a little bit. No.
But he will not admit that they're wealthy. It's just insane to me. But like, picking up a TV is not something you normally ask somebody.
Pick up a candy bar.
Yeah, but a TV is kind of expensive. So I don't know. But he talks about the fact that he lied about his alibi, and that, once he started lying, he just kept lying. And the defense attorney says, and did you continue to lie after that? And he said, yes, I did. Once I started to lie, I kept lying. And he said, well, why did you continue to lie? And he goes, oh, what a tangled web we weave. It's just once we lie, we keep lying, and we feel like we have to keep lying. And he talked about how the reason that he lied was because he was so distrustful of Sled, because because of his addiction, that he had a lot of paranoid thoughts. And he says, it could even be something as simple as if I'm driving down the road and a cop pulls out behind me, right? I mean, I do that. I get real scared. I'm like, and now I'm going to jail for the rest of my life. Like, I know that. Like, I'm not doing anything wrong. But he said, it could be something as simple as that. And then in a matter of seconds, I could tell myself, you're not doing anything wrong. They're not looking for you. And then I could just get past it. But for whatever reason, he couldn't get past it. So he says here, well, they were asking me about my relationship with Maggie and Paul. They tested me for GSR. I felt like I was a suspect already. And so I began to not trust them. And for whatever reason, I didn't feel like I should say that or whatever. And so that's kind of his Colin Ray. That's my story. And I'm sticking to it. Like,
Love.
Not
good
going.
Reference.
Thank you. Jim Griffin is asking him questions like, and didn't you tell Sled they could search whatever they want anytime they want? And he's like, absolutely. I told them they could search what they want. Anything they wanted, they could have it. I gave them access to everything. I never took access away from them for anything or whatever. He says, what about when you talked to Shelly, the caretaker, and Blanca, the housekeeper? Did you ask them did you ask them to change what happened when they talked to Sled? And he's like, no. He's like, I went to Shelly and I knew Sled was going to talk to her. And I just said, hey, Sled's going to want to talk to you. And I'd really appreciate it if you did sit down with them and talk with them. And then he goes, and I just told her to tell the truth. I don't know why she thinks I wanted her to change the story.
This motherfucker. Oh my God.
And he said, I believe Shelly to be a good person. So I'm not really sure why that's sticking in her mind. But, something had to have happened to make it stick in her mind that way. But I just told her to tell the truth. And then Jim Griffin goes, and didn't you take extra care not to talk to people that you knew Sled was going to talk to? And he said, yes. And he's like, well, why is that? And he's like, well, because when everything happened with that boat case that you've heard so much about in this courtroom, people thought that I was trying to influence police officers and influence witnesses and influence people. And so I made sure to stay away from people that Sled was going to talk to so that they didn't think that I was doing anything to try to influence any of them. I mean, he makes it sound just like everybody's making a big deal about this, but so, bleh.
And that I feel like shows how much he has done that behavior, like with the embezzling type of stuff. Like, oh wow, everybody's making a big deal about it, and it's not even that big of a deal. Like, wow, like
That's what he does. And I mean, it typically works for him. It has for 20 something years at least.
Yeah.
So then Creighton Waters gets to cross-examine him, and it's glorious. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. The first thing that they talk about in this cross-examination is Alex's badge. The badge that he has for being the 14th, it's not precinct, 14th district solicitor. He's a volunteer solicitor or whatever. And in South Carolina, they call them solicitors. It's their prosecutors. They also, like here, our prosecutor, that's their only job is prosecution. There, they also have private practices, which is why Alec had a private practice and everything like that. He was not the main solicitor. In this cross-examination, he said that in 20 years of being a solicitor, he probably had 5 criminal cases. He assisted on most of them, assisted his father, because his dad was a solicitor before him, his dad before him. They'd been the solicitors and owned the police and run the town for, 100 years or whatever. So they talk about this badge, and they talk about the badge in the boat case too, because if you watch the CCTV footage from the hospital in the boat case, you see him walking in and his father getting there, but you see his badge hanging out of his pocket. It's visible for everybody to see. And so Creighton asks him, what is this? He's like, oh, that's my badge. And he's like, okay. Did you ever use this badge to get into areas that maybe you wouldn't have normally been able to get into? Or did you use this badge to get influence or get information maybe you wouldn't be able to get to? And he's like, I may have over the years, sure. And he's like, well, did you typically carry it out where it was visible? And he's like, no, I would not have carried it that way. To me, that just looks stupid. I wouldn't have done it that way. And he had a second badge that he kept in his car visible in his car. And they were like, well, why'd you do that? He's like, well, I found that if law enforcement pulls you over and they see a badge and think you're part of law enforcement, they're nicer to you. He's like, I didn't know until the trial, but Alex Murdaugh had blue lights, like police car blue lights installed in his vehicle. And he was not law enforcement. And they're like, well, why'd you do that? He's like, because I wanted them.
What?
And he says he got approval from Duffy Stone. Duffy Stone says, I did not approve that. I don't know. But anyway, he had blue lights too. I mean, he did whatever he wanted. Nobody stopped him. Nobody questioned him. Nobody said, this is a small town. He's driving around with fucking blue lights on his car, and nobody was like, you're not law enforcement. Why are you doing that? They just said, oh, Murdaughs are acting like Murdaughs again. They do what they want. We're not allowed to say anything. I mean, it's just nobody stopped them. Yeah. But Creighton really goes into all of this because if you have blue lights installed in your car, and that's not legal, and the police didn't even bother to stop you or have you remove them or whatever, and he says that the police in fact gave him permission to do that, then does it make sense for him to say, I was terrified of law enforcement and that's why I felt like I had to lie? No, because these are people that have been in your pocket for 30 years and now You're scared of them. And Creighton Waters says, you weren't scared of law enforcement. You weren't scared of SLED and all those other departments when you walked in that hospital that night and acted like you owned the place. But now you're scared. That night you're scared. And he even gets him to, they went through it and he's like, because he says the same thing, he's like, well, and you, said in your testimony that you were scared because they had asked you about your relationship with Maggie and Paul, and they tested you for gunshot residue and you felt like you were a suspect. So Creighton actually plays one of the body cam footage of when the first responding officer gets there. And he says, when's the last time you saw your family? And Alec actually says initially, well, I went and visited with my mom for about an hour and a half. And so I think I saw them about 45 minutes before that. I swear that's what he said. But either way, he lies about it right off the bat when the first responder gets there. And so he stops the video and says, had they swabbed your hands yet? No. Had they asked you about your relationship with Maggie and Paul yet? No. Had they done anything to make you feel like a suspect when they first walked up to you? No. Okay, so then that's not why you were afraid of them. Like,
No.
I mean, you can't trust a damn thing he says.
No, not even.
And he thinks people are too stupid to pick up on this. Like, I don't know. When they talk about the financial crimes and they get into some detail about that, and a lot of people online were like, he's talking too much about the financial stuff. He's going to confuse the jury and bore them, and they're not going to. People were really afraid that they were going to come back with a not guilty verdict. I thought it was really effective because he actually went through some of the people that Alex stole money from, but his question to him every time was, and tell me about when you sat down with that client and looked them in the eye and said, I'm here to help you, but you knew that you had either already stolen money from them or you were about to steal money from them. And he's like, well, I can't tell you a specific time that I sat down and talked to them about that. Did I sit down and talk to him about that? Maybe, maybe not, but I can't tell you about that. And he's like, you can't remember one time when you sat in front of somebody? Because, he's saying to go through all this, you're their lawyer. At some point, you're sitting down with them and telling them what the settlement's going to be or what it ended up being or whatever. And you're lying about that. And you're telling them that you're going to put it in this account for them when really you funnel it into your own account. Like there was a firm called Forge Consulting that I guess PMPED either put some of their money in or something. I don't know. It was something for like client settlements or whatever. So Alec went to the bank and opened an account just called Forge, so that when PMPED looked at it, it would say it was deposited into Forge, and he just named it the same thing. So like he knew what he was doing, and he's just like, well, I can't tell you. I mean, maybe I did sit down and talk to them. Sometimes it was me, sometimes it wasn't. And he's like, well, then tell me about one time that you did that, because you're telling me it's so wrong and you regret it so much and you have so much remorse, but you don't even remember telling any of them. These people who one of the clients he stole from was a quadriplegic after an accident. And he considers that man and his family to be good friends of his. I still consider them to be good friends. But you don't remember when you sat down and told him that you were going to sell money from him. And I thought it was powerful because he goes through several of these people and asks him the same question. And he says, but you were able to sit there and convince them that you were doing right by them, right? Mm-hmm. And you were able to convince them that you had their best interests at heart and that you were fighting for them. But all the while you knew that money was going directly into your pocket. Like, it just shows the jury again that, like, why the would I believe this man?
Right.
He's doing it now. I mean, it's obvious. And he doesn't even care about it enough to remember it later. It's somebody he cared so much about. And his response every time, Mr. Waters, I told you this. I stole money I shouldn't have. I misled people I shouldn't have. And it was wrong. And I shouldn't have done it. And that's his answer every single time. It's almost like Harpootlian was like, just say this. And he did every time. It was like a parrot thing. So at one point they talk about what was the money used for. And of course he says he bought drugs with it, right? That's his big thing. I had this intense opioid addiction and I spent money on that. At one point in his testimony, though, they ask him how many pills a day is he taking? And his response, once he starts doing the math, because he's like, well, sometimes it'd be this many milligrams, sometimes it'd be this many. He would have had to take over 100 pills a day to get to the amount that he's talking about, which is completely incompatible with life per doctors.
Well, I was going to say, that would be lethal. Like,
yeah. So I've seen people say, I don't know if he really did have an addiction.
He's just using that as a scapegoat for.
Yeah, because if you took 100, because he was saying he was taking 3,000 milligrams, 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams a day of like Percocet, whatever. And if they're, however many milligrams a piece, like he would have to get over to hundreds. And
that's insane.
It's simply not possible. Right. I mean, if he was really addicted, he might have lost count how many he took in a day, but he couldn't take that many and survive.
But I can see 15, 20, let's say.
Mm-hmm. But
You know.
he never overdosed that we know of. Like, there's just no way he was taking that much. So
Right.
there's a lot of stuff he describes that is consistent with withdrawing from drugs and stuff like that. But when he said that, people were like, did you really then? Because you couldn't live. You just couldn't live.
Right.
Either way, he says a lot of it went to buying drugs. And so Creighton Waters is like, okay, but some of it went to fund your wealthy lifestyle, right?
He does not have a wealthy lifestyle,
Lord
though, so let's
of mercy. Yeah, please do not call it wealthy. He went back and forth on that. Like, just, I mean, I don't know that I'd consider it wealthy. And I mean, you're saying wealthy, but I didn't consider it that. And I didn't think I mean, they chartered private jets everywhere that they went. Like, dude, you had a wealthy lifestyle. Like, you just did. And I don't know why he doesn't want to admit that. But he really, that goes back and forth so much. And that's how he answers questions. It's just like, well, I wouldn't characterize it that way. And then, and then it's like, well, I don't have an issue with you calling it wealthy. It's just not how I felt about it. And then it's very, well, I didn't have an issue. And, but he won't answer the question to begin with. It's very whatever. And he does that all the time. And it feels very, and I think this came through to the jury, it feels like he's just trying to gaslight anybody who asks him questions. And it made me think of Maggie. Can you imagine any conversation she ever had with him? Because she was beginning to question what is going on with the money. This isn't adding up. And if she asked a question, he pulled this shit with her and made her think that it was her fault and made her think that she was crazy. And what is she asking about? I didn't have a problem. You had a problem. And like all this stuff, I felt bad for her. And I read an article that they interviewed some of her friends, as happens with a lot of cases like this, when it becomes a high profile case and about the trial and things like that, the victims themselves get lost in it. And they and we only really knew about Paul and Maggie through the boat case before this, and they don't come off great in that case, either one of them, Paul especially. But Maggie's friends said that she had absolutely no say or authority in this marriage. It was all Alec. She wasn't privy to any information. He handled everything. So she threw her entire heart and soul into her boys, and they said she spoiled them to a fault maybe, but she loved them more than anything, and she was doing the best she could, and she had no say, authority anywhere else. They said that she was not trying to leave Alec. So, maybe she wasn't. Maybe she was just asking questions. And they said that she was staying at the Edisto Beach house. And one of them said that by that point they were kind of living separate lives. Like maybe she wasn't going to leave him, but she was just sort of like not just necessarily being home with him every day. And they were having work done at the house. And Alex says this in his testimony too. She loved staying at the beach house when they were having work done. And she loved being able to kind of manage that. And that may be because she didn't have a say in anything else. That really meant a lot to her, but she loved staying at the beach house. And she was not planning to go back to Moselle that night. He asked her there. Now, he says in his testimony that he found out later that she went there of her own accord because she was worried about him because of his dad. But he didn't know she was coming until she got there.
Sure. And why would she be so frantic? Let's say that that's true. It's not, but let's say it's true. Why would she go to Moselle that night or that afternoon or whenever if the dad being in the hospital was like kind of...
It's just not a big deal. It's a routine thing. Mm-hmm. I don't know. She does whatever she wants to do, man. And he even said in his testimony, now I remember this. Oh, it made me so mad because Creighton Waters asks him, Well, you said that when they went to the kennels, you didn't want to go to the kennels. What made you change your mind? Because, before it was you were asleep. And I loved it. Anytime Alex said anything, Creighton, or if he was going to ask a question, he's like, okay, so according to your new facts today, because you've never told anybody before you were at the kennel until yesterday. So now that you're telling this new story, according to your brand new story that you just told for the first time ever yesterday, why did you change your mind and go to the kennels?
I love it.
And he did that time and time again. And I was like, get him. And Alec was like, because Maggie wanted me to. And he sat there for a second and he goes, and like most things that if I didn't want to do, but Maggie wanted me to, I usually ended up doing them anyway. And I was like, you gotta be fucking kidding me right now. You are gaslighting her from the damn grave. Like,
what a
You win every argument. Yeah.
On the side of my face.
I was so mad. I was like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. So he does end up saying that he went to the kennel because she wanted him to, and he had changed his mind and blah, 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 blah.
Okay, Sugarland. Wasn't there a song that was like, oh, maybe not. I'm thinking of, I packed a cooler in a house.
I bet Alex Murdaugh likes that song. Now,
I do love you don't want
to. Exactly. I do love, I forget her name now. Is it Jennifer Nettles? Because she played the mom in The Righteous Gemstones, which was like, so she was great in that.
God, she's great. Yes, but
Misbehaving. I love that song.
I'm sorry. I was thinking of a Sugarland song.
Yes. Yeah, no, that one was her and Baby Billy. It was so funny.
That was a good one.
But I don't remember what we were saying at that point.
Well, he was saying that
yes.
Gaslighting her from the grave and that kind of thing. Yeah.
He was, This is when we get kind of to the timeline of everything. And okay, well now, according to your brand new facts that you didn't tell anybody until yesterday for the first time in years and years and years. All right, now let's talk about it. So he says he took the golf cart up to the kennels. He did not bring his phone with him though. And here's another thing that he's just not sure about. Creighton is like, so did you bring your phone with you? He's like, well, according to these records, I must not have because there's, my phone isn't shown up there. And he's like, well, didn't you take your phone with you everywhere? He's like, no. And he's like, Mr. Waters, if I was just going to go somewhere like to the kennel for just a minute and know I was coming right back, it would not be unusual for me at all to leave my phone behind. If I was going to be gone somewhere for a long time, then yes, I would bring my phone.
Liza Minnelli.
I know. I don't believe that just with his prolific cell phone usage. I think it was typical for him to carry it with him everywhere.
Okay. I love this guy. Sometimes I bring it with me to the bathroom. I don't think I'm going to be spending a lot of time in there because I'm a speed shitter. But sometimes I take it with me to the bathroom. I'll admit it. If I'm going somewhere, especially outside of my house, I'll take it with, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, think about, I'm trying to think, because even the house behind where you live, the house that we used to live in, if for whatever reason we were going back and forth between the two, you would take your phone with you, and it's closer together.
Yes.
So it doesn't make sense. So he's like, well, I must not have. I don't specifically remember taking it or not taking it, but I must not have. He can't remember that.
He's so Jeffrey Epstein with the line of questioning. I plead the 17th, 14th, 54th, and 723rd Amendment on this question.
Exactly. So then he asks, okay, so what happens when you get to the kennels? And he's like, okay, well, I mess with the dog and whatever. And he's like, well, what did you talk to them about? And when Jim Griffin is asking him the same timeline, he never asks him, what did you say to them? Or did you tell them you were going to visit your mom? He's very just like the actions and whatever. So Creighton is like, okay, well, what'd you say when you got up there? I don't remember. I don't know if I said anything to him. And he's like,
shocking.
What about when you left? Because in his testimony with Jim Griffin, because apparently when he got up there, their dog Bubba had a chicken in his mouth. He'd caught a chicken and brought it up to him. And so Alec gets off the golf cart, takes the chicken from Bubba, sets the chicken somewhere where it later died, unfortunately. And then Jim Griffin is like, okay, what'd you do after that? And he goes, I got out of there. And he's like, I left. I got on the golf cart and I left. So Creighton Waters is like, all right, so you get out of there, right? You got out of there. You lickety split, get out of there. He's like, you're characterizing that as me rushing out of there. That's not what I said. And he's like, well, you said I got out of there, didn't you? And he's like, well, whatever. So he's like, okay, well, what'd you say when you left? See y'all later. I'm going to visit my mom, because we know from his phone records, he's texted Maggie a few times saying, oh, by the way, I'm going to go visit my mom, which when nobody knew he was at the kennels, that made sense. Why would he text her? Because he doesn't think anybody knows he's there. But if he physically went to the kennels minutes before he left to go visit his mom, and he knew he was going to visit his mom, it would make sense for him to have said that to her while he was there.
Yeah.
Clearly he didn't. So they're like, well, what'd you say to her? Did you tell her you were going to visit your mom? He's like, I don't remember. I mean, I don't really think we said anything. So they get into this big thing, and Creighton's like, so you got on the golf cart. You never speak a word to either one of these people. You go up there, you silently get the chicken off, put it away. You get back on the golf cart, you turn around and you leave, and you don't say anything to them. Well, I'm sure I would have said something like, see y'all later or bye or whatever. He's like, but you don't remember. He's like, no, I can't tell you exactly what we talked about. And he asked him, what did y'all talk about at dinner? Did you and Maggie talk at dinner? Not real sure. Can't remember exactly what we talked about. And he's like, okay, so this is the last time you see your wife and son, and you don't remember your last conversation with them? And he's like, I do remember having my last conversation with them. Well, then what did you say? I can't tell you. I don't remember that. I don't remember what was said. I just remember that I saw them. And it's like, after covering as many cases as we've covered, seeing what is something that people talk about when they've lost somebody over and over and over. The last thing I said to her, the last thing she said to me was, and that is seared in their memory. And he has no idea. No idea. So he leaves, he goes and visits his mom, all that. Creighton asks him, actually, you're at the kennels with the dogs. So he says there's Bubba's out, Grady is out, and they're messing with Cash because he's got something wrong with his tail. These are the 3 dogs he mentions. And they have many other dogs too. It's like they have all those hunting dogs and whatever. And he's like, well, let me ask you that. Were the dogs acting weird? He's like, we mean weird. And he's like, well, were they on like high alert? Like, like if somebody's around, yeah. You know how dogs act if there's somebody around they don't know. And he's like, were they acting like, were they on high alert? And Creighton's like dogs do when there's somebody around they don't know. And he's like, I couldn't tell if he was just trying to be difficult or if he really didn't get where he was going with this. But he was like, there was nobody else around, so they weren't acting upset. There was nobody else around for them to be upset about. And Creighton's like, okay, because now we're a couple minutes before they're shot. These people would have already had to be on the property, right? Mm-hmm. And the dogs are off their leashes and they're not going after anybody. Like, so, and he just acts like, of course not. Why would they be? And then we know that Alex's cell phone is dark from, I don't remember specifically the time in the beginning. I think 7:52 p.m. to 9:06 p.m. or 8 something to.
It was 8 something.
It would be 8 something. Yeah, 8. It must have been 8:52 to 9:06.
Because of the napping.
Yes, exactly. So then his phone comes back on at 9:02. And from 9:02 to 9:06, his phone records 283 steps during that time period. This is a big damn deal because I think I read an article that said that would be like 70 steps a minute for 4 minutes or, whatever. That could be wrong because I could easily do 283 divided by 4, but 70 something steps. So This is him essentially running, jogging around. And if you look at the steps that it recorded before that, so like from the time, for like the hours before that, it only recorded like 100 steps total for hours. So he is up and he is moving. He's moving at a quick pace. He is here, there, and everywhere. So Creighton's like, what were you doing for those 4 minutes? He's like, well, I guess I was getting ready to go to my mom's house. Well, what were you doing to get ready to go to your mom's house? I don't know, just like doing stuff to get ready. He's like, well, you told us. Yeah, exactly. And he's like, well, you told us you already took your shower before and changed. So it can't be that. So what were you doing? He's like, there was nothing to get ready, like in that sense. Like I wasn't like getting ready, but I was just like getting up and getting going, like just, moving around and getting going or whatever. And so he's like, were you on a treadmill getting ready to go to your mom's? And he's like, no, Mr. Waters, I was not on a treadmill. And he's like, okay. Were you jogging in place while you were getting ready to go to your mom's? And he's like, no. And he's like, well, what were you doing? Because your testimony before this was that you were, and he still says that once he got back to the house, he laid on the couch for a few minutes, possibly dozed. So why is your phone recording all these steps? And he's like, well, now you heard the testimony just same as I did when the phone guy came in, and he said there's lots of different ways that you can record steps on your phone. If you're sitting there kind of shaking it like this or tapping it like this, it'll record steps. And Creighton was like, okay, so were you sitting there doing like this then while you were getting ready? And he's on the phone at that point. He's making calls. He's like, are you trying to talk on your phone, tapping it like this? And he's like, no. It's like, well, what were you doing?
Exactly.
He cannot account for that. And it doesn't make any sense. I felt like he came off as slippery. He came off as evasive. He came off as, I feel confident that I'm going to talk my way out of this. Because when he gets on the stand, he also has to say everybody else is lying. Shelly's lying. I never asked her to change her answer. Blanca's lying. I never asked her to change her answer. Jeannie Seconder is lying. She felt like it was a confrontation that day at work, but it wasn't to me. I didn't categorize it as a confrontation. Just she did. Everybody else was worried about my dad, but I didn't think it was a big deal. Like none of those things translated to him. Everybody else was wrong.
Right.
And it just doesn't make any sense. And so they kind of end the cross-examination with Creighton hammering, you mean to tell me that you as a lawyer and a prosecutor yourself did not think that it was important to share with law enforcement the most important information of that day, which was that you were at the kennels minutes before your family was gunned down, and you didn't tell them that? And he's like, well, no, I lied to him. And then he's like, but you have said repeatedly that you were completely cooperative with the investigation. He's like, well, I was, except for when I lied to him about my alibi. But everything else, I was totally cooperative.
Right. And
he's like, nothing further. He was so mad. So that didn't go well for him.
Obviously, yes.
And of course, the last day of the trial, the jury actually went to Moselle to see the layout and the distance. I mean, some things were different, but that way they could kind of see like where the driveway was and the kennels and all that.
Yeah.
And of course, as we know, they came back with a guilty verdict. The closing statements were great, but it's a recap of what we've already talked about. Judge Newman did not give him, anything. And he said to him, what really stuck out to me when he was sentencing him, he's like, you have had the audacity to sit there and act like June 7th was a normal day for you. When the cards were starting to crumble, when everything was coming down on you all at the same time, and you have had the audacity to sit there and act like that was a normal day for you. And I think that two things can be true. I think that he can be sad that he lost Maggie and Paul, even though he did do it himself. I think that for him, because again, if Paul went away, all the boat case went away. And then he could have had the money to pay PMPED back, and maybe nobody would have been the wiser. It would have stopped everything looking into him. There was an investigation into his behavior after the boat case, which was was he influencing people and intimidating witnesses and stuff? That would have gone away. Everything would have gone away, and the Murdaugh name would have been kept intact. Right. And I think that was important to him. It was so important to him that he justified killing his wife and son for it. And I think he genuinely does miss them. I think he genuinely is sorry that they're gone, but I think that he has separated those two things in his mind and justified it. And he's been sentenced. He'll never get out of prison. And he still has not gone to trial for all his financial crimes. And that's like another 100-something counts or something crazy.
He'll never, ever, ever get out of prison.
Mm-mm. So that's the trial, man. It was
darn.
I know it. But I was really proud of the jury. They saw right through him. And
proud of the prosecution and proud of the judge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, everybody. And also these were, because I believe Creighton Waters worked for the state attorney general's office, so he wasn't like a lawyer that was real ingrained in this Murdaugh family dynasty thing. But still, these first responding officers were. So it's a lot of people that finally said, this isn't going to keep happening.
Yeah.
So
it's amazing. It's admirable, because to go against the grain like that in a small town with such a big pull, it's hard. Yeah, it's got to be hard.
Yeah, for sure. And there are other, cases. The Gloria Satterfield, which was their previous housekeeper, she died. People say under suspicious circumstances. There's no evidence to support that anybody pushed her down the stairs or anything like that. Maggie did, in fact, go visit her at the hospital before she passed away. Nobody else did in their family, but she did. But Alec 100% stole the money from her sons.
And I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, Stephen Smith. Mm-hmm. They have exhumed his body, and they're doing more testing. There just is no evidence that we know of, other than people had rumors, saying that maybe he and Buster were an item. There's no evidence to suggest that Buster has ever been in a relationship with another man. And so for that, I do feel for Buster too. If there comes out definitive evidence that he had something to do with it, that's one thing. But right now we know that Alex Murdaugh killed his wife and son.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's all that we can. I'm not a judge and jury. You're not, I'm not, nobody is unless you are. And so it's not fair to put the nail in the coffin for somebody else, or, know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's it.
That was a wild ride, man.
It really is, yeah. So we hope you guys have enjoyed this.
I know I have.
Let us
you know what I mean, but
yeah. Let us know if you want us to do more stuff like this. I know the Gwyneth Paltrow ski trial is going on right now, and apparently that is a wild ride.
I've heard about it, yes.
I've seen some of the clips of her lawyer. I'm like, is she paying him money? He's almost as bad as, or maybe is worse than Amber Heard's lawyer was, objecting to her own damn question.
Well, I'd watch that in a heartbeat. So
I know it's I've heard it is interesting stuff.
Yeah.
So let us know if you want us to cover that. Because apparently I love watching trials.
You do love watching trials. And I thank you for it, because I don't have to. And I can just sit here and be like, I do. But thank you guys so much for hanging out with us. We love you, and we will catch you next week. Bye. Bye.